Here's an unspoken truth about homebrewing your own adventures and campaigns in Dungeons and Dragons that we as game masters don't like to think about. And that's trying to be original is actually a waste of time, because nothing is completely original. The Witcher series was inspired by Michael Moorcock's Elric of Melniboné, and even The Lord of the Rings was inspired by the German opera The Ring of the Nibelung. The question for us isn't actually how do we make things original, but instead, how do we remix the things that we love so that they're not complete ripoffs? And the short answer is to steal. And by steal, I actually mean 1. Stripping the setting to its core idea. 2. Twisting familiar tropes. 3. Extracting the aesthetics. 4. Amplifying the contrast. And 5. Layering your own ideas. So here's how it works. Stripping the idea to its core. In filmmaking, there's a term called the controlling idea. It's basically a theme that's explored and encountered throughout the course of the story. For example, the controlling idea for The Witcher could be you can never be neutral in a monster-filled world. So to define what the core idea is, think about what makes the story or setting compelling. Is this a story about revenge, of legacy, tragic destiny, forbidden love? And once you have that, it's time to move on to twisting the familiar tropes. When Dragon Age Origins first came out many years ago, it was a groundbreaking RPG. But one of the most fascinating things about it was how they portrayed elves in the very first game. Elves are not the high and lofty race as they're typically portrayed in other fantasy settings. In fact, in Dragon Age, elves were pretty much portrayed as the gutter trash, the outcasts, the slaves of society, which is super powerful because it was so different from what we were used to. So in twisting tropes, ask yourself these questions. What is the opposite of this trope? What would it look like through a different lens or culture? What could be completely unexpected about this particular thing? But if you think about it, what makes a fantasy setting so darn memorable in the first place? Why does one really resonate with us and the other doesn't? This is where extracting the aesthetics comes in. Dragon Age Origins, for example, really leaned into the blood-related themes and tied it deeply into the world's lore and setting. How the blood of the Darkspawn could be a taint and a death sentence, but at the same time, it was the very catalyst which empowered the Grey Wardens to be who they are. So start by asking yourself, what attracted you to this particular setting? What do you love about the weaponry, the armor, the magic? How are these things being used and portrayed? Now, interestingly, when it comes to magic and magic weapons and magic items, we often think about what power our players gain. We don't really think about the cost or the sacrifice that's associated with wielding this kind of power. What would it actually cost to wield the flaming sword? Or cast a fireball? Warhammer 40k explores this idea super well, because in order to use psychic powers, Grey Knights and other Psykers need to tap into the warp. And the more they tap into the warp, the more they put themselves at risk to being corrupted by the forces of chaos. But now that I have all these pieces here, what can I actually do to make it my own? And this is where amplifying the contrast comes in. Amplifying contrast is all about pushing the contrast of your tropes and ideas further to the extremes. For example, in Warhammer Age of Sigmar, Sigmar would spirit away souls of warriors and forge them into his Stormcast Eternal. But with every death and resurrection through the anvil of apotheosis, these souls would lose part of their memories until eventually nothing of their former identity would remain. A haunting mirror to their golden ornate image. So with amplifying contrast, ask yourself, what are the possible consequences if these ideas were carried to their extremes? Lastly, don't be afraid to layer your own ideas. The kind of media you consume will reflect in the campaigns you create. And if you notice you're coming back with certain themes and ideas, try looking outside your area of interest. Build up your visual library with other things. As much as I love fantasy, I also love sci-fi and cinema and classical literature and other things that I generously borrow from. Inspiration is everywhere, and your library is waiting to be filled and tapped. Example time. So we are going to steal from Avatar: The Last Airbender. For me, the core idea of Avatar: The Last Airbender really comes down to facing your fears in order to fulfill your destiny. Aang was too young to really comprehend his role as the Avatar, and he decided to duck out for a couple hundred years. Contrast to the last episode where he's confronted the big bad Fry Lord guy. Now, because this is kind of the controlling theme and idea, what I would do in a session 0 is ask my players, what is it that their characters want to achieve? Now, the next question I would ask also is, what is their greatest fear? Once you have these two things together, then you can sneak this into your campaign, keeping it very thematic to the world and also very meaningful for your players. Now, twisting the trope. So the obvious trope in Avatar is that certain people can bend the elements, air, water, fire, earth. But what if being caused the element to be corrupted? So that anytime somebody used a bending power, that actually corrupted the element around it. So for example, what if using water bending actually made the water nearby undrinkable? What if airbending caused the air to become poisonous or toxic? What if bending Earth would cause the Earth then to be barren and arid, not able to sustain life? What if bending fire would cause the temperature to rise permanently in the place that it's being used? So, of course, extracting aesthetics, I love the Asian wuxia vibe. So, if I'm thinking about running this as a campaign, I would definitely want to lean into those themes, but also think about what would happen if it was pushed to a grim, dark sort of vibe rather than a cartoonish one. Now, for amplifying the contrast, what if those who could bend were forced into service by the Grand Master of the nation? What if the greatest benders of each nation had an Omega level weapon of mass destruction type power move? And because of this, the tension between nations is ramping up. And that kind of leads into the next one of layering your own ideas. Now, for me, I enjoy stories like The Lies of Locke Lamora, where the main characters are not so much the movers and shakers of the world, but they are definitely swept up with the things that happen around them. So what if the players were part of a band of benders who escaped conscription and are working in secret to try to subvert the Grandmasters in order to save the world? So with all that said, the campaign can look something like this. We have a dying world where those who wield elemental power corrupt the very essence they seek to control. And in this setting, a group of nobodies is commissioned to do the unthinkable, and that is to assassinate the Grandmaster of their tribe in order to save the nation from utter devastation. So remember, when it comes to homebrewing campaigns in D&D, there's nothing new under the sun. So don't feel pressure to try to come up with something original every time in every game for your players because you think that this is something that they're going to enjoy. Learn from the best and remix your heart's content. And hopefully these suggestions are going to help you remix your own ideas so you can create something truly amazing. Now, these are strategies that work for me and they might not be for everyone. And in fact, I'm actually curious on how you guys create your campaigns. Where do you find inspiration? How do you remix them all together? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks very much for watching Game Master, and until next time, may your tales never end.